Welcome to the Foothills, a Colorado lifestyle and real estate podcast featuring mountain home real estate broker Robert Martin, who has over 25 years of experience assisting clients reach their goals and move forward. Tune in each week for a dynamic conversation with experts, Colorado adventurers, and residents that explores the ins, outs, and specific nuances of buying the perfect mountain home or selling your dream home in Evergreen, Conifer, Bailey, and surrounding areas to catch a glimpse into the Colorado lifestyle that's a part of you.
Welcome to the podcast, back again for more sharing. It'll be wonderful. Tom Straus. Tom, you've been on the trail and would like to get an update and see. We visited with you back in May as you were doing a through hike of the Continental Divide Trail. Quite an undertaking. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Yeah, very, very well at the moment.
Good. Well, you look great. I'm just saying you look healthy and refreshed. So you were on the trail and some things happened. We'll talk about those things as we move on. But what were the first 625 miles like? Right.
So I'll just share a little bit about my adventure down to the border of Mexico and New Mexico. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I flew down to Phoenix and then I had to grab a bus down in Phoenix that took me down close to the border on that journey. And then I gave myself like a day, okay, to get there. And when you get down to this town, then they have a minivan that takes you down to the border. But it's really important that you catch that ride, because if you don't, it's completely booked up and then you're kind of on your own. So on the way down, though, the bus broke down and we had to, and it was about, of course, 95 degrees, 100 degrees in there somewhere. And we had to unload everything on the bus and we had to wait until another bus came. Then they had cars that came that took some of the gear, and then the bus came that took some more of the gear, and everything was kind of crazy. But we all managed to get all the gear to a Greyhound, and I have to give compliments to the person who was running the show down there for Greyhound. They did an outstanding job. They got us all there. And then we had another bus come later that evening and to transport us to New Mexico, close to the border, and I got there in time. I didn't get a lot of sleep, but hey, it was an adventure, and that's that's what this is all about. That's a big part of it. Okay.
Reminds me of the Shawshank when Red's on the bus and he's going down to see his friend Andy.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Sort of, not quite, but a little bit.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right. Exactly. No.
Yeah.
So that was fun. So you get down into this town, then you get the shuttle that takes you down to the border. And we had like 6 people, I think, that was on that shuttle, 5 or 6 people, something like that. And so we all started off as a group. And so where they put us, though, isn't like a city. It's just there's a landmark down there. And they purposely do that. A long time ago, I think they started it out in the city. And they ran into some conflicts, of course, on the border and stuff like that. So now they've kind of relocated. It's very safe. It's really a good thing. So we started hiking from there. And so we're in New Mexico. And the first town we come into, it's all water caches. So there's no water at all. So the water is about every 20 to 25 miles. So you have to be able to go that far unless you want to bring a lot more water in, or carry it somehow. You can get a lot of these caches, but, you're hauling more water weight. So generally speaking, you're going to want to be able to backpack at least 20 miles from the get-go. And it's pretty rough. A lot of people had rough stretches. I think when I came there in May, they said they had bailed 15 people already out of that single stretch. Okay, and I think it's about 80 miles or so.
Why was it rough, Tom? Was it the terrain or just the heat?
I didn't feel it was rough, but I think a lot of people with dehydration, they're not used to the hot weather in the desert. Those are probably the biggest factors, I would think. Dehydration.
Right.
Sunstroke, maybe, heat exhaustion. Probably heat exhaustion more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of an interesting stretch. And then I think once you got through there, you got into your next town, which is called Silver City, a nice little town they have there. And I was in a hostel there and I met some wonderful people. And let me just say right off the bat that, so I'm 62 now, and most of the people on the trail are going to be in their 20s. Okay. I would say for the women, if they start getting 30 or more, that's kind of an outlier. For the guys, if it's 30, 35, they're, start to be an outlier. That's generally the group.
I was just going to say, were there a lot of other people? It sounds like you were the outlier as far as age, or there might have been some other people in the same age group, but most of them, in their 30s and late 20s, it sounds like.
Right. The other part of that is, generally speaking, on the trail and the history of the trail, there's always usually about 300 people or so that would start the trail. Well, in the last few years, especially since they put permitting on the PCT, this year there was about 1,000 people. And we know that from there maybe even been a little bit more, but we sort of know that from all the people who were registering at the post office and what the people were saying in the hotels, things like that. There were quite a few hikers this year. So you get to a little town called Silver City. It's a wonderful little place. I stayed at a hostel, met some just wonderful men and women, all like in their 20-ish and stuff, a lot of energy, stuff like that. Great. Okay, so now you're going outside of Silver City. And don't worry, I'm not going to go town for town, okay? This is kind of important. But then you get into some areas where there's no trail. So you're just kind of out there trying to figure out where you're going to go. It's about 15, 20 miles. And then you get into this is now the first time about 15 to 20 miles outside of Silver City, north of Silver City, you start getting into some beautiful pines. I think there are red pines in there, just some really wonderful backpacking. And now you're getting close to what they call the Gila Wilderness. And it's Gila, Gila, okay? Important, because Gila Wilderness, this is a gem. And not a lot of people know about this, and they'll probably kill me for telling them. This is canyon hiking. So now we're in the middle of the desert with no water, and all of a sudden we get into the Gila Wilderness, and there's water like crazy, okay? And you're hiking in this canyon, and you're crossing the Gila, and I'm not sure what the river is called. It's in the Gila, as you're crossing the river about 100 times at least, and just walking all through it and stuff like that.
Is it deep, or how deep is it?
No, I would say the highest level, at least when I was there in May, was probably up to my waist. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's probably going to get much higher than that.
And what do you do to treat your water? Do you filter it, or do you treat it with chemicals?
Right. No, I filter it. I have a Sawyer filter, so I put that on my bottle. And that's really the way to go. It's fast. So a lot of people don't do that. They like to squeeze and stuff. They have, It's your personal preference. Gotcha. But I just have it that I put on my water bottle. You just fill up your water bottle, you twist it on, and you go. And I think that's the way that most of the thru hikers, if you want to make time, that's what you do. So you're going through this canyon and you cross this river literally about 100 times. It's really amazing. It's beautiful. The thing about canyon hiking, which is sort of interesting, is that the walls are probably several hundred feet high, right? So the sun doesn't hit that area until about 10 or 10:30 in the morning. So you're getting up hiking about 6 o'clock. And the thing that's sort of interesting with New Mexico is sort of an area of extremes. So in the day, it can be like 90, 95. The sun's burning right through you, and it really is. To the nighttime when your water's freezing. Okay? So you're waking up at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning. All of a sudden you hit this river, and it's shade. And you're not going to get shade till 10 o'clock in the morning. So, you're going through this mental game kind of early in the morning, kind of going through it. But again, it's the adventure and it's the fun of it. It is beautiful beyond comprehension. Canyon hiking is a lot of fun. And this is a different type of canyon hiking than like Arizona and stuff, because you actually have the rivers and you're in the water and that kind of thing. So it's in
the canyon, the river runs through, but there's also trails on either side, and that's why you're crossing back and forth. And then you can only go so far, I would assume, because of the walls of the canyon. Right. So it's a little tight in some areas.
Right. Sometimes it's tough to follow the trail.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Wildlife down there?
I didn't see a lot of some deer I saw in there. Not particularly a lot. No, not really. Mm-hmm. But it's beautiful.
What do you think your favorite part was? I mean, from the time you spent with the beginning, that sounds like that was a highlight. And I can imagine just getting up and having that 4 hours where you're not getting hit with direct sunlight. You probably make really good time. So what are some other things that stick out for your time?
So the Gila by far was the most beautiful. It is a gem. Now, in New Mexico, I went about 525 miles to Grant, New Mexico, until the USDA And that's who runs the show down there. And I think it's because of all the ranches. It's all ranch country down there. And they're the ones who told the thru hikers, hey, you got to get off the trail. I mean, it came from a lot of different sources. And nobody really had an issue with it because it was super dry down there. All the thru hikers knew it. The wind was blowing at times, and it would go for 3 or 4 days at 20 miles an hour, at least, and even through the night. So as you get through the Gila, now you're back into the desert, and it's pretty serious desert. And like I said, the wind's blowing really hard. It could be 10 o'clock at night and it's still blowing really strong. And so you just, it's really difficult.
What were the things, Tom, that, mentally, what are some of the things maybe that, your mind was talking to you saying, hey, what are you doing out here? Why don't we, especially when it's really hot and the wind's blowing and maybe it isn't, I don't want to say it's an unpleasant experience because I'm sure it's not, but you know what I mean?
Right. I do know what you mean. Right.
Yeah.
So I think a couple parts to this. One thing is being older. So again, I'm an outlier and I'm hiking a lot on my own. I'm solo. Listen, these kids are great. I apologize for calling kids, but they're 20 years old, in the 20s, But I really have a lot of respect for them because they're all solid and they're really good. But they're going to hang around with their friends, and that's kind of what they do. They bring me in when they can and stuff like that. But I'm out there solo, and generally speaking, a lot of the hikers are kind of hiking solo during the day, but at night they kind of get together and they all know where they're going to be and stuff like that. They're all going 20, 25 miles a day, stuff like that. So they all kind of know. So when you talk about the mental game, you need to kind of bring in this whole solo experience because it's a whole nother dimension. Okay. When I was on the PCT and I was about halfway through, I don't know, it was probably a mile 1,500 or 1,200, somewhere in that. I remember very distinctly being with a group of 20-year-olds. And they were saying, wow, we're halfway through this and it's so incredibly difficult. This is, the hardest thing we've ever done. And I didn't say anything, of course, but in the back of my mind, I'm saying, they're saying, we're not having any fun anymore. This, it's not fun. And I'm saying to myself, well, this isn't really about fun. This is a mental game. I mean, you can have some fun. You have fun when you're in the town and stuff like that. But this is really all about the mental game. And that's what it is. I think a lot of this comes into play when we're training, kind of trying to do all this kind of thing. I think the younger people are really smart in that they try to group together. They have what they call these tramleys or these trail families that they hike with for support and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a pretty good idea if they want to complete the trail because it is really tough.
So what is the mental game?
So I think that the mental game is being super positive. When I'm out there, especially, and everybody kind of has this point in time along the trail, it's different for everybody. But certainly for me, it's like when you're halfway through the trail or maybe somewhere in that time frame, if you hear of anyone saying anything negative at all or saying, I'm not having fun, I'm not doing this, I can't do it, or anything negative at all, you're out of there. You cannot bring any type of a negative attitude into your head. It just doesn't work. So I think the main part of the mental game is being extremely positive. And I think the other big part of the mental game is being very fit. When people ask me about being out there solo and all that kind of stuff, how do you do that? And fitness plays a huge role into it. If you get into a problem, if anything bad happens, whatever, your fitness a lot of times will bring you out of it. So those are kind of the two main components.
Yeah, I could see how your fitness too would bring on a lot of negative ramifications if you're not, if you have some injuries or you're not feeling like you're up to the task. Also, describe a little bit more, Tom. You said at nighttime, the hikers kind of get together and there's groups that support each other. What is that like? And then at nighttime, you just kind of sit around and visit and talk about the day and that sort of thing?
To be honest with you, I haven't had a lot of experience because I'm usually by myself, but sometimes there are like camp areas where they're all together and stuff like that. This is a very tight group of people. Everybody supports everyone else. And a lot of times you have very long-lasting friendships that come out of this. And I know people from all over the country, from the PCT, from the Colorado Trail, that I'm still in touch with, and we're very close.
Yeah, well, it's something that is deeply enduring like this. And like you said, the mental game is the challenge, for you to continue, whether the weather is blowing heat in your face, or you're maybe concerned about water and you got to do a food drop, and you're not sleeping in a comfortable bed, all of that, can kind of compound, I guess. And then when your mind starts to chatter and say things, gosh, Tom, we sure got a comfortable bed at home, or
Yeah.
wouldn't you like something grilled on, how about a hamburger or something? I mean, you know what I mean? Or,
I know exactly what you mean. What people do, I think, a lot on the trail is they think about those things that they want when they get to the town.
so that gives you a little respite. When you get to the town, you can get some of those things and kind of get that out of your head, move on, so to speak.
Right.
Hamburger.
Right. I would say the third part of this mental game, which is so important, and we really do this every day, certainly as a part of our jobs and things like that. But so we're never really thinking about the 3,100 miles or the end, right? It never really comes into play. I mean, maybe it's in the background, stuff like that. But really all we're thinking about is the next town.
Mm-hmm.
What's coming up in the next 100 miles, 120 miles, and that's where I got to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the thought. And then the thought is, okay, when I get to that town, what do I want to eat? And it ranges from ice cream to you name it.
Yeah.
But that's how, think about our lives and how we work and everything like that. You got to piecemeal it. And if you don't do that, you're not going to succeed. It's just that simple.
That's a very good point, Tom, because a lot of times we live, we dwell on the past sometimes, which is good, or we think too much and live in the future. Mm-hmm. It sounds as if, you're certainly more focused in the now. What kind of ice cream am I going to have? And I can, take a little shower or do something. So it sounds like, you're taking an opportunity to disconnect from a lot of technology and different things to reconnect, to, kind of getting more focused and living in the now and in the present time.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. I'm even going to take this down to another level and just say a couple things. So, and this happens to me, and I don't know if it happens to other people, but it takes me about 3 days when I'm on the trail to get all the noise out of my head, all the cars, all the motorcycles. And I know, I'm not saying anything bad about anyone, of course, sure. But I mean, everyone has that noise. Mm-hmm. And when you get out there, there's nothing. And it takes a while to get used to that. So what happens, at least to me, is that now you get that noise out, and now other things are magnifying. The birds, if you hear a chirp or you hear anything with the bird, that's now a huge magnification. It'd be like, a honk of a car, right? A horn. Just the little things are becoming the magnification. And that's kind of how our senses change over. Now, the other thing I just wanted to mention to you, it's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up, is that so things are very simple on the trail. It's really a wonderful life. It's a simple life. Think about this. You get up in the morning, and all you really have to know is maybe where you want to stop at the end of the day. Do you want to go 20, 25 miles? So you might want to start looking at that a little bit. You're doing that the night before, probably, and just kind of looking at your phone or however you're using your navigation, right? And the other side of this coin is you want to start thinking about water. And it doesn't matter so much if you're in the mountains, but when you're in the desert, you pretty much want to know where those water sources are. And those are usually pretty laid out for you on the maps and stuff like that. And those are really your two things that you're focusing on that morning. So we're taking it, not only for getting into a town, but now we're starting to take it day by day. And you can, of what you're looking at when you get up in the morning. And then you can actually focus on it even more than that if you want. But yeah, I think your idea about living in the moment is really important in this particular situation.
Do you think, Tom, so now you've been back, and as you, continue, a normal life, so to speak, off the trail, if that's the way we'd categorize it, maybe not. Those moments spent on the trail, you can refer back to those and say, kind of get you refocused and just kind of living in the now and being more aware of the small things, like the car honk or the, or the chirp or the something like that.
Yeah, it takes a while when you're on the trail for a while, it takes a while to readjust into society. There's just no question about it. I think that the hardest thing for me is all the priorities. Mm-hmm. Now you come back and you may have a house, you have an apartment, and you're coming back to a job, and Now everything gets very complicated in a hurry. And you're like, whoa, I'm not used to this type of thing. So yeah, I think that it's very important to sort of bring that whole wilderness experience back into your life, try to slow some things down, try to think about how things were on the trail. I think that's very important. I think sometimes we say that hindsight is 2020, but I think what we really want to focus on is insight. What have we learned on the trail? I always tell people that I never go onto the trail with anything, right? My head's completely clear, but I always come off the trail with just huge things, really important lessons. And that's insight.
Are there any insights, nothing too personal or anything that maybe you wouldn't want to share, that maybe you would want to share? Any insights you've gotten from your 625 days on the trail recently?
Right. So I want to go back and we want to talk about that. It's 625
miles rather.
Right,
sorry.
right.
Yes.
The one thing that I learned from the younger people that I just don't have a huge exposure to, maybe you do, but this whole idea about social media and about image and those type of things. And a lot of these kids are pretty astute in how social media and things can harm you, with these, and it's not just with the kids, but it's with the adults too. These situations that come across in our society of perfect, commercials a lot of times, or, just how things are reflected in our society about perfection. The perfect family, the perfect person, the perfect work life, the perfect mom, the perfect dad. And it's not like that. The trail is perfectly imperfect. Everything is imperfect out there, except for nature itself, which is to some degree, perfection, I guess, is how a lot, unless we ruin it, of course. But I learned that was a really important lesson for me, from the young people. Mm-hmm. So, they can learn stuff from us, but certainly we can learn stuff from them too.
Sure. So do you think, Tom, that the maybe a young person would look at the social media, how would the experience of being on the trail change them? Or would they change their interaction possibly in social media, or find it less important, or just try to be who they are and not try to be who they think they should be?
Right.
That kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think the latter part is certainly the most really important part of that, is to kind of come up with who they are as a person and not really go by what social media or what anyone else says they should be. And that's a tough thing. I mean, there are a lot of these people are out there to try to figure out who they are. They're 20 years old and they're running into this. I certainly was. Heck, yeah. I went on the PCT at 55 and I never thought I could learn anything. And I learned everything. I learned so much about myself. So again, one of the beauties of these trails, really seriously, is you go out there with nothing and you usually come back with something. I think that most people do, learning about themselves, learning about other people, that type of thing. I think the other message that I kind of got out of these young people is that, maybe we shouldn't be on social media as much. Maybe we should cut back. Maybe it's just not a healthy thing. Or there's maybe some things I should figure out that are healthy, but there's a lot of it that isn't really healthy. And I'm not saying anything bad here, but I'm just saying that for each person, it's very important for them to determine, based on who they are in their sensitivity level or how they project themselves or anything, of moderating that. In making, you're all wonderful, we're all wonderful people, and I think we need to kind of embrace that with who they are.
I think that's a great point. You look at it and you maybe become more aware of, those types of things, and maybe you weren't quite as aware of them as you were prior to starting, a trek on the trail, and realize that those things maybe aren't quite as important. And I'm sure they still post and different things, when they have signals and that sort of thing. But to totally disconnect for a period of time too, I think you realize that, you can say, okay, yeah, I can go back to that, or I can do it I can do it differently, or, to your point of really being who you are and not, not somebody else. Or, And in that age group, you're so right, Tom. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I went to California to find myself, and I never did. So I had to get a real job and continue, my life. But it doesn't matter what age you are. There's always that time when you get inside and you want to figure things out and
Right.
spend some quiet time. So I think those are really good points.
There's just one other point that I need to mention to you about this. And I think this is just so important, is that on the trail, and this happens to be like the 20s and whatever, but it can be any age and it can be any person. It's very non-judgmental out on the trail. You wear whatever you want. You put on whatever tattoos you want. You would put on whatever piercings you want. You do whatever you want. And people aren't going to judge you out there. That's not how it works. This is a very tight group of people where everybody supports one another, because this is rough. There's nothing, I think on my last video we talked, the CDT, and all the trails are kind of like this, but the CDT is 917,430 feet of elevation gain. That's suffering. I don't care what you say or who says it. At some point along that trail, as the young people say, they say stuff I don't even know. They say, "Oh, this is a suck fest." They're like, "What the heck is that?" But it's suffering. And when you have a whole group of people, no matter who they are, you're bonding on suffering. And you are going to stick together and you're going to help one another. And that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, I like that term. I'll have to remember that. So when the evacuation was happening, Tom, what was that like? Did you see that coming, or was that a surprise?
Boy, that's a tough one. We knew there were fires that were north and that were east of the CDT, okay, that weren't impacted. We knew them as we're coming up the trail. So I think some of us were kind of really not sure what was going to happen. What I saw personally, what concerned me, was the wind. And I'm telling you, there were probably 4 or 5 days, or maybe let's say 3 to 4 days where it was just windy. And I'm talking about 20 mile an hour, 20 or 30 mile winds all through the day and into the night. And when you have a fire, and if a fire and it is super dry, everybody knows it's super dry. There's just no question. USDA, everybody told you that. If you're on the wrong side of that fire and it's that windy, there's just no way. You're not going to make it. So I think I don't think it really took anyone by surprise, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Like I said before, these are really sharp kids. And nobody complained. And I think that everybody thought, you know what, this is a good decision. Let's get out of here. We don't want anything bad to happen. And as far as I know, everyone complied right away. Yeah,
it would be a prudent thing to do. And like you said, you get a real good sense for things out there. And it would be hard not to think that was a good thing to do, and certainly for safety and for everybody. At what point, Tom, did you decide to leave the trail? I know you weren't feeling well. You left after the fire, came back,
right? And
unfortunately, you got ill. And how did all that work for you?
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. So this is kind of strange. So I got to Grants, New Mexico, which is 525 miles. Okay. Now I was cruising. I was doing well. I was feeling good. Life was really, really good. And I was loving every second, especially that Gila. And even outside of the Gila, we had these, what they call red pine forests, and they were beautiful. It was beautiful backpacking. I think I like New Mexico. It's the first time I've ever backpacked there, and I was in a couple of towns there and stuff. And I think it's a wonderful place. I really think it's a great place. Now, to get out of there, that was tough. Okay. So again, we go back to this trains, planes, automobiles, and hitchhiking. Okay. Now, if you're 20 years old, people driving by and you see a 20-year-old with the thumb with the backpack, okay, that's about right. Okay. But when you see a 62-year-old guy up there with a backpack, hey, this is a little bit outside the norm, right? So it was a little bit harder for me.
You do look a bit like Forrest Gump, so that might have helped.
Well, thank you very much. You're not the first person who said that, okay? So what I did is I used the Greyhound, and I could afford that. But a lot of these young people, they can't. So they're thumbing out of different places of where they are along the trail, okay? Mm-hmm. And what I did is, so everybody trying to figure out where to go. Now, most of the United States, and this is in May, okay? So this is about mid-May or so, maybe a little bit later than that. But a lot of the United States is in snow. I mean, certainly Colorado. Remember that late snow we got in Colorado?
Yeah, we
So
sure did.
the San Juans still had a lot of snow in southern Colorado. The only place that really didn't have snow was the Great Basin, but that was way up in Wyoming. And to get up there was tough, and especially if you don't have any money. So people were really struggling a lot. I decided to go back to Evergreen because that's where my home was. And I still had, I had probably several weeks where I could come back and maybe rest up a little bit and go back on the trail down by the San Juans. And that's what I think a lot of the people did. They went to different places where they could find friends and just go out for a little while. But most of them reconvened in the southern section of the San Juans. Now, they did this pretty early. I was not comfortable, but they were going in. That the group that I started with was going in right about June 1st. And there was still a lot of snow in the San Juans. There were a couple rescues in there. The one thing we have to be very careful about when we talk about social media, when we're on this podcast and stuff like that, are the dangers. Because, one person may go on and say, oh, it's super dangerous, but you don't know their level of experience, you don't know their fitness, you don't know anything else. And then we have other people, some of these young, men and women who are really good at it. And they'll say, oh, there's no danger at all. So there's this term that we on the trail we call fear mongering, and that gets thrown around a lot. And it's really a tough thing. So what I will say is what they did, and I know some of those sections in there, I was in there in the Colorado Trail and stuff like that. What they did on June 1st, for me at 62, I wouldn't have done, because I just am not at that level anymore. My 20s, I maybe would have done that. And some of the people who I know went on that had a fair amount of snow experience from the PCT and stuff like that. Well, I waited. So let me just back up. So on my way to Evergreen, I caught a really bad cold. I wasn't wearing a mask. And in hindsight, you think at 62 that I would be smart enough to wear a mask with all that kind of traveling and stuff like that. But I never have in the past. And I caught a really bad cold, and it turned into very serious bronchitis. Okay. Now, I didn't have COVID. Boy, the doctors right away tested me for COVID twice, actually. And it wasn't COVID. It was just a bad cold. So about mid-June, my group was so far ahead. And I knew that, there's an urgency on these trails to go ahead, because you only have so much time. We've talked about that, to finish. And so I jumped on the trail, and I still had bronchitis. And I went about another 100 miles in southern San Juans. And then I had to get out. I was down to ground zero. I had nothing in the tank as far as energy, and it all caught up with me. And I was out there solo, and so I had to get out of there. So that's kind of how that whole thing progressed. And in most of the hikers, as far as I could tell, were going into the lower San Juans pretty early, and they were successful. And again, they went in big groups. These kids are smart. They went in at six or five or six at a time in groups, and they got through it.
That does sound very prudent, especially, taking on an area where there may be more snow than you anticipated or that you really were comfortable with, but having a group mentality to help each other out. How did your gear work out for you, Tom, including, your tents, your shoes, and that sort of thing?
Right. So I've been doing this like we have talked about 40 years. And I would say about 90% of the issues that I have run into have all been, the knee or below. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I do want to talk a little bit about the feet and different strategies with that. So most of the through hikers wear what I guess what we call more of like tennis shoes, and they're thicker soles. And I don't, the Ultra would be the manufacturer, or the brand, I guess is Ultra. That's what most of the people have. I think Brooks is the other really popular brand on the trail. They're wider. And as you go, your feet will spread out. So you need pretty wide shoes. And the reason they use these type of shoes, and not like hiking boots or anything like that, is because they're lighter, you can move faster. And if they get wet, they'll dry out a lot faster, okay? So those kind of are the shoes you're looking for. And they're very specific on the trail. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is blisters and stuff. That's by far the majority of what people have. I have had some success with these 5-toed socks, but I think what a lot of people tend up using also is what they is different type of tapes that you can use on the trail. And I tend to tape my toes and I tend to tape my feet a lot. And a lot of these tapes will stay on your feet for several weeks at any one time. So I think that's also an important aspect of not getting blisters. It's kind of like prevention type of thing.
The finger socks, though, they worked well for you?
They have worked very, very well for me. And there's a fair amount of people that use those on the trail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5-toed socks. Right.
But yeah, without those, you don't need any type of taping. Is that correct? Or
well, there's again, this comes back to training.
mm-hmm.
And you certainly, when you train, you certainly want to use heavy packs. So because that's what's going to get your feet conditioned and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But even so, to prevent blisters, taping is generally a pretty good thing. That's what I do. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I want to touch a little bit on gear, because I just want to tell you what sort of through the New Mexico, I just had a tarp and I never even used my tarp. I said New Mexico is a place of extreme, and that's with the exception of the sun and the stars. And, those are constant. And so, you have a lot of wind, you have other things, but for the most part, I was under the stars for the whole time I was in New Mexico. Okay. So I just had a tarp. But then when I moved into the San Juans, now you're looking at a tent. A tarp's not going to do it. You're going to get snow, you're going to get rain, and that type of thing. And also, you also want to consider site selection with snow, okay? And would they have these freestanding tents? And that's what most of the thru hikers use. And that's something that I would highly recommend, because when you don't have the dirt and you just have the snow, site selection becomes an issue. And you have to have a tent that you can kind of put anywhere. So
it would be a freestanding tent that is self-contained with a floor and everything, or would you just do more of a tarp tent? Or
well, it's the floor and everything. You can pick it up, you can move it around, you can do things like that.
Okay.
And most of the people have those kind of tents. I like those. They have small footprints. There are other options that you have that are a lot lighter, and maybe those come into play later on in the trail. But they're pretty hard to manage in the snow and in rock and things like that.
What was your menu like each day?
Right.
Just a quick synopsis of that.
Right. Okay. Real quickly on that. So there's a woman, if you want to look at anything about food, and she's a dietitian. I've met her. She's a wonderful person. Her name is Brenda Broughton, Braaten. You can look her up, and just look up a dietitian through hiking or something like that. But she's a dietitian. She through hiked, and she wrote a really good paper on it. This has been backed up by other dietitians. But generally, the high-level idea is about 50-55% carbohydrates, 30-35% fat, and then the rest would be protein. Okay. So for me, and I'm going about 4,000 calories, and I think that's the high end for me. Now I'm older, so I'm not burning stuff like the 20-year-olds are. So the amount of weight that I'm bringing in food is a lot less than a lot of the younger people. So I'm going about a pound a day, which I know works for me, but I think everybody has to figure that out. There's an old saying on the trail that women come out buff and men come out gaunt. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that, and I can attest to that for sure. When I was younger, that's what happened to me. But I think those are the kind of guidelines. I think that a lot of people have bars. Nuts are huge for both the fat and the protein. A lot of people do that. Your olive oil is going to be big for fat. I do oatmeal you want fiber. I think what's really important is this Carnation instant breakfast, because that has a lot of the vitamins. You're not getting that kind of stuff. And I think the other real big hitter on the trail is cheese. I bring freeze-dried cheese myself. A lot of people don't like that, but that's what I use. But I mean, you get the idea of the mix and stuff.
I think what you said, the overview of carbs and fat and that sort of thing. And then, maybe referencing Miss Broughton's paper, that sounds really good too. So as far as next year, Tom, I know you're training to do this again next year. Yeah. What does that look like, and how many hours of training do you do per week, or are you just starting on that regimen for next year?
Right. So I took about a month off because I was really down to ground zero, and I had to do some major recovery. But I've started up, and I'm going to just change my regimen just a little bit. I'm starting off running for right now because that just feels right to me. And I'll do that for a while. until I get more into the specifics of what I want to do. And then I'll start putting the pack on and stuff like that. But I would say for right now, I'm running every other day and I'm in the weight room every other day. And I think that's the other big component as we get older. I think in our last session, we talked about, it's never too late to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big component of that is, especially as we get older, is to keep our strength. And especially in the backpacking, that is a huge part, the endurance part. Those packs get heavy. And the one thing that I forgot to mention is, and then I was wrong about in our last video, is that there were a lot of big water carriers early on in New Mexico. And so we were pushing 35-pound packs and maybe more 40-pound packs. And so if I had to do it again, I would be training with a little bit heavier packs. But yeah, I think I may throw in there maybe a 50-miler running just to kind of keep things interesting and kind of get the head game back, something like that. But then I'm going to get more into the specifics of the weight. Yeah.
What are you looking forward to most as you try for next year? What do you think you'll be focusing on, or what with the trek next year? What are you looking most forward to? I mean, now you'll know some of it. Will you start where you left off, or will you do the whole thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to start where I left off. I'm not positive on that, but that's what I think I'm going to do. I'm really looking forward actually to meeting a lot of the people. I just had a blast with the people that I met on the trail, and I thought they were really nice. I'm looking forward to other parts, not only Colorado, but getting up in Wyoming. There's some beautiful sections that I haven't been to up in there. And the thing, Robert, is that I'm maybe a little bit different than most people. I love the train. I mean, I love to get out there every day. I told you last time I had an endorphin party just about every day. And that's really true. I mean, I love being out there, and as I always say in Colorado, we have it so nice. Here I live in Evergreen. I have parks that are all so close to where I live. And what I'm changing things up a little bit. I'm getting much more involved in the community here with volunteering.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just, I'm going to mix it up a little bit more.
Do you think next year, Tom, if you had a partner or two, would that change things, or your training, or would you be able to push each other and encourage each other? Are there challenges more doing it solo, or if you had a couple partners going with you?
Right. You almost read my mind in that. That's an amazing question. So I have had some people ask me if the people who haven't done the trails, before, they've had like people on the Colorado Trail, and they've said, might you be interested in something like that? And yeah, I would say I would be. I think there are some big challenges with hiking with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a lot of teamwork doing it, but I also think that you have to have an open mind and let people go in their direction if they need to go in that direction.
Right.
So, it's a tough one, but I would enjoy the company, to be honest with you. So yeah, if anybody who is listening to this, if they want to do the trail with me and, they think, they might want to hike with me, whatever, I'm open to listening to any suggestions.
That sounds great. That would be, it'd be nice if someone stepped forward, if that worked out for you, if that's what you wanted. So I really appreciate your time, Tom. It's been really great catching up, and I really appreciate you sharing everything about your trek. And I'm certainly looking forward to your next year and how things go for you there. Is there anything you'd like to add that maybe we didn't touch on?
No, not really. The only thing that I think is so important is that, hey, we can do this stuff at any age. You start slow, it doesn't matter. And it's just, when you do this, it's really wonderful.
No, I appreciate that, Tom. I look at you as someone that is an inspiration, simply because I'm just behind you, 59 years old, and I do have aspirations to do some through hiking. And, whether I can do it or not, we'll find out. But it is something that I've done some, but not to the magnitude that you've done, but it is something that I look forward to. So, well, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate your time. To the Foothills, a Colorado lifestyle and real estate podcast. On the podcast, I interview real estate experts, Colorado adventurers, and residents who enjoy the serenity and lifestyle of living in our mountain communities. Tune in each week for a conversation that explores the ins and outs of buying the perfect mountain home or selling your dream home, and catch a glimpse into the Colorado lifestyle that's a part of you.